Ch.18 Puqi Shrine talks the Guile tales of the half-moon past too. Under Xie Lian's and San Lang's gaze, the cultivator held up the water bowl to his lips and bent over to slowly gulp the water down. He did not look as if he was satisfying his thirst. Instead, he looked cautious and guarded. As he drank, Xie Lian could hear sloshing sounds, as if water was being poured into an empty bottle. At that moment, Xie Lian knew what he was. He seized the man's arm. "You don't have to drink anymore." The cultivator's hand trembled as he looked at Xie Lian in bewilderment. "Drinking wouldn't help anyway, right?" Xie Lian smiled. The man's expression instantly changed hearing this. He unsheathed his steel sword with his other hand and swung it towards Xie Lian. Without changing his stance, Xie Lian raised his hand and easily flicked the sword aside. Seeing that Xie Lian was still tightly gripping onto his hand, the cultivator gritted his teeth and extracted it from his hold suddenly. Xie Lian felt the arm in his grip suddenly go limp like a balloon deflating as it slipped away from his palm. The moment the cultivator broke free, he ran towards the door, but Xie Lian wasn't concerned. In this undisturbed space without people around, Ruoye could drag him back instantly even if he fled a good distance away. But just as he raised his other hand, a sharp blast of air whipped by him. It was as if someone had shot an arrow behind him. It pierced the man through his stomach and nailed him to the door. Xie Lian looked over, and it turned out to be a chopstick. He turned back for a look. San Lang stood up from the altar and walked past him to pull out the chopstick. San Lang waved the chopstick at Xie Lian and said, "This got dirty. I'm gonna throw it out." Even with such a serious wound, the cultivator did not groan in pain. He simply silently slithered down from the door. Fluids flowed from his abdomen. It wasn't blood, but the water he had just drank. Xie Lian and San Lang knelt down next to the body, and Xie Lian felt around the wound. He felt as though this wound was like a blown-up balloon that had been pricked. Cold air was leaking out of it, and the cultivator's corpse gradually changed. Earlier, he was clearly a buff man, but now he'd shrunk a size down. His face and limbs shriveled even as he continued to shrink. He looked more like an old man now. "It's an empty shell," Xie Lian noted. Some ghosts, if they could not transform into a perfect human form, would create these empty shells. They would use realistic components to meticulously create a fake skin bag. These skin bags often used real, living humans as references. Sometimes they would even use human skin directly to make the skin bags. Naturally, their palm prints, fingerprints, and hair would all be flawless. And if the ghosts themselves did not wear these skins, there wouldn't be any evil aura stuck to them, so they would not need to heed those evil repelling spells and talismans. This was why the seal of the door did not block the cultivator outside earlier. However, these kinds of empty shells could be easily seen through. After all, they were hollow on the inside. If there was no one wearing the skins, then they could only follow instructions of the manipulator. Like puppets. The instructions couldn't be overly complicated either. They had to be simple, repetitive, and set up beforehand. Therefore, the expressions and behavior of those skin bags were lifeless and sluggish, unlike real humans. For example, they could only repeat certain phrases, do certain repetitive things, or answer their own questions. If one asked too many questions, they wouldn't be able to answer, and would end up exposing themselves. Of course, Xie Lian had more practical ways of exposing those skin bags. Just let them drink some water, or eat something. After all, skin bags were hollow, without any organs. If they ate or drank, it would be like throwing something or pouring water into an empty can. The echo could be clearly heard, and it was a sound very different than that of a human consuming food and water. The corpse had completely deflated into a pile of withered skin. San Lang poked at it with his chopstick and threw it away. This shell is rather interesting. Xie Lian knew what he was talking about. This cultivator's expressions and movements were more than realistic. He had conversed with them animatedly, gestured wildly, responded emotionally, very much like a real person. Whoever was behind its control had to be quite powerful. Xie Lian glanced at San Lang. Looks like you're quite knowledgeable about these wicked arts too, San Lang. San Lang smiled. Not too much. This empty shell came to Xie Lian specifically to tell him about the Banyu Pass. Whether it was fake or real, its intention was obviously to lure him there. To play it safe, he would have to inquire about it in the communication array. Xie Lian pinched his fingers and calculated the power he had left. There should still be enough to use it a few more times, so he formed a seal with his hands to enter the communication array. The communication array was livelier than usual, and it was not because of deities bustling around with official duties. Rather, it seemed everyone was playing some sort of game, laughing and shouting. Xie Lian was taken aback. Just then, Ling Wen reached out to him. Your Highness is back. How were your days down in the mortal realm? It's all right, not too bad. What's everyone doing? They seem so happy. Xie Lian asked. Ling Wen replied, the Wind Master has just returned and is giving away merits. Why don't you go and see if you can grab any? Sure enough, Xie Lian could hear the many officials cheerfully shouting. I grabbed 100 merits. How come I only managed to get one? 1,000. 1,000. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Thanks, Wind Master. Exclamation mark. H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A-H. It was like catching money raining down from the skies, Xie Lian thought. His donation box was empty. But for one, he didn't know how to make a grab for those merits, and second, the officials must be very familiar with each other to play those sort of casual games. Xie Lian wasn't on good terms with many, and didn't think it was appropriate for him to join, so he paid it no mind and called out to the crowd. Does anyone know of the Banyu Pass? The laughing and shouting came to a sudden stop and silence ensued. Once again, Xie Lian felt depressed. It was fine if no one responded to his little snippet, if they were odd or awkward. The other officials didn't share those either, and he indeed seemed to be out of tune with them when he did so. But this was official business. The communication array was a place where heavenly officials often made requests for information on ghosts or mystic issues. If something came up or someone asked for assistance, everyone pitched in, giving suggestions or giving a hand. Those without anything to add would say, I'll ask around. When I'm free, Banyu was work, so there was no reason why no one responded. Just then, someone shouted, "Wind Master just threw out 10,000 merits!" Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! The communication array came alive again, and the officials went away to grab for more merits. Thoroughly ignoring Xie Lian. This made him realize there was probably more to this than it appeared, and the court would never respond. This Wind Master was certainly quite affluent, Xie Lian thought, throwing away tens of thousands of merits like that. He was about to exit the communication array when Ling Wen called out to him privately, "Your Highness, why did you mention the Banyu Pass?" Ling Wen asked. Xie Lian recounted his encounter with the skin bag. That empty shell pretended to be a survivor from the Banyu Pass. It has to have a motive. I wasn't sure whether his words were true, so I came in to ask, "What's going on with that place?" Ling Wen was quiet for a moment before she said gravely, "Your Highness, I advise you to stay away from this matter." Xie Lian had thought she might say something similar. Otherwise, a matter like this wouldn't have lasted for over 150 years, and have the court go silent just because he asked. Is it true that half the people go missing every time they traverse through Banyu? Ling Wen was silent again. It's not easy for us to speak on this matter. Xie Lian heard the deliberation in her words. There might be something putting her on the spot, so he said, "All right, I understand. If it's inconvenient, then we shall not speak of it again, and we have never spoken in private on this subject either." Xie Lian withdrew his divine consciousness and left the communication array. He rose to his feet and used the broom to sweep the fake skin to the side. After mulling over Ling Wen's words for a moment, he raised his head and looked at San Lang. "San Lang, I'm afraid I will be going on a long journey." Ling Wen's attitude was enough to show that this matter implicated too much. Since this empty shell came to him on its own, then it must have wanted to lure him there. It was definitely not a good place to be at. Yet San Lang said, "Sure thing. Gege, bring me along too, if you don't mind." Xie Lian wondered curiously, "It's going to be a long and difficult journey, so why do you want to come?" San Lang smiled. "Do you want to know about the Banyu Pass?" Xie Lian paused, then said, "You know about that too." San Lang crossed his arms and replied languidly, "The Banyu Pass was originally not known as Banyu Pass. The Banyu Pass was where the kingdom of Banyu used to be located 200 years ago." He sat up straight, eyes going bright. The wicked cultivator of Banyu was. Xie Lian placed the broom against the wall and was about to sit down to listen when a knock on the door came. It was already evening, and the villagers were hiding in their homes after hearing there was bewitchment about, so who was knocking? Xie Lian stood by the door and held his breath briefly, but he didn't see the seal reacting. Another knock came. It sounded like there were two people outside. Xie Lian contemplated for a moment, then opened the door. Sure enough, two young men dressed in black stood at his door, one handsome, one elegant. It was Nan Feng and Fu Yao. Xie Lian said, "You too?" Fu Yao rolled his eyes, and Nan Feng blurted out, "You're going to the Banyu Pass, aren't you?" "Where did you guys hear that?" Xie Lian wondered. Nan Feng said, "Some officials were talking about it. I heard that you asked about the Banyu Pass in the communication array today. Xie Lian understood their intentions and crossed his hands in his sleeves. I see. I volunteer, right. Both junior officials' expressions contorted as though they had a toothache. Yes. Xie Lian couldn't help but smile, and said, I get it. But I want you two to understand that should there be any issues or crises en route, you're welcome to run away any time. Xie Lian stepped aside to invite them inside to discuss the journey in detail. But then, when the two saw the carefree teens sitting inside, their initially grim faces instantly turned ashen. Nan Feng charged in, pushed Xie Lian behind him, and shouted, stand back. Next chapter. Ch.19 Puqi Shrine talks the Guile tales of the half-moon past 3. What's wrong? Xie Lian asked, startled. San Lang stayed in his seat, spread open his hands, and also asked, what's wrong? Fu Yao furrowed his brows and demanded, who are you? He's a friend of mine. Do you know each other? Xie Lian answered instead. San Lang, looking completely innocent, asked, Gege, who are these two? Hearing San Lang call Xie Lian Gege made Nan Feng's lips twitch and Fu Yao's brows spasm. Xie Lian raised his hand and said to San Lang, it's nothing, don't worry. But next to him Nan Feng shouted, Don T, speak to him. What? Do you know each other? Xie Lian asked again. No, Fu Yao said coldly. If you don't, then what are you? Before Xie Lian could finish his sentence, he sensed lights flashing next to him. He looked back without giving it too much attention. The other two had produced balls of divine energy in their palms at the same time. An ill sense of foreboding overcame Xie Lian, and he grabbed at them in alarm. Stop. Stop. Don't act rashly. The bulbs of divine energy were pulsing, statusy and dangerous, definitely not something a normal person could make. San Lang clapped a couple times in polite appreciation. Amazing. Absolutely magical. It was truly the most insincere compliment. Xie Lian finally caught Nan Feng and Fu Yao's arms to stop them from firing. Nan Feng turned to him angrily and questioned, where did you meet him? What's his name? Where does he live? Where is he from? Why is he with you? Xie Lian answered, we met on the road, his name is San Lang. I don't know anything else, only that he has nowhere to go, so I let him stay. Will you two please stop? You. Nan Feng couldn't speak. It was as if he wanted to scream at Xie Lian but forcibly swallowed his words. You let him in despite knowing nothing? Exclamation mark. Aren't you afraid that he might be scheming something? Why did Nan Feng's tone sound like his dad? If it was any other heavenly official or another person, if they heard someone younger say anything in such a manner, they would have been displeased already. But first, Xie Lian was already used to all kinds of rebukes and taunts, so he felt nothing, and second, he knew that those two meant well, and were only saying things out of worry, so he didn't mind. At this time, San Lang cut in. Gege, are they your servants? Xie Lian replied warmly, the term servants isn't quite right. To be more precise, they should be helpers. I guess. San Lang smiled back. Really? The youth stood up, grabbed an object, and threw it at Fu Yao. Then, why don't you help out? Fu Yao didn't clearly see what was thrown at him before he caught it. Once it was in his hand and he saw What it was, his temper surged to his head. That boy threw him a broom! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Fu Yao looked as if he wanted to crush both the broom and the teen into powder, and Xie Lian hurriedly took the broom from Fu Yao's hands. Calm down. Calm down. I only have one broom. Before Xie Lian could finish his words, he was cut off by a burst of white energy shot out from Fu Yao's hand as he bellowed, "Reveal yourself." San Lang stayed where he was, arms still crossed in a relaxed posture, but tilted his head just slightly as the beam of energy narrowly missed him and smashed one of the altar table legs. The table collapsed with a loud crack and all the plates crashed onto the floor in a heap. Xie Lian rubbed his temple and thought, this had to stop. With a wave of his hand, he released Ruoye and tied up Nan Feng and Fu Yao. Both men struggled but failed to break free. Nan Feng shouted, "What are you doing?" Xie Lian made a gesture for a timeout. "We'll talk outside." Outside. Then he waved his hand and Ruoye flew out, dragging the two in tow. "I'll be right back," Xie Lian said to San Lang, then closed the door behind him. At the front of the shrine, Xie Lian called back Ruoye, took the sign at the entrance, and set it down in front of the two junior officials. "Read this. Then tell me what this says." Fu Yao read aloud, "Please kindly donate to the renovation of this shrine for accumulation of good merits." He looked up at Xie Lian. "Donations for renovations. You wrote this. You are at the very least an ascended heavenly official. How can you write such a thing? Where's your dignity?" Xie Lian nodded. "That's right, I wrote it. If you guys keep fighting inside, then I will be asking for donations for construction, not renovation. By then I would have even less dignity." Nan Feng pointed to the shrine. "Your Highness, you don't think that boy isn't the least bit odd?" "Of course I do," Xie Lian said. "You know he's dangerous, but still you keep him by your side." Nan Feng demanded. Seeing that they had no intent to donate, Xie Lian placed the sign back by the door and replied, "Nan Feng, that's where you're wrong. There's all kinds of people with various temperaments and mannerisms. In the world, odd doesn't mean dangerous. Look at me. I'm odd in everyone's eyes, but do you think I'm dangerous?" Nan Feng really couldn't defy that logic. Xie Lian clearly had the saintly look of an immortal, and yet he still collected scraps all day. If he was not odd, then no one was odd. Fu Yao said, "Aren't you afraid he has ulterior motives?" He slowly asked, "Do you think I have anything worth enough for him to scheme for?" Nan Feng and Fu Yao were stumped. Indeed, schemes against another often were designed because a person was coveting another's treasure. Tragically, they honestly couldn't think of anything belonging to Xie Lian that was worth scheming for. He had no money and no treasures. The boy couldn't be eyeing that junk he collected every day, could he? Xie Lian continued, "Besides, it's not like I haven't tested him." The two junior officers stared at him. "How did you test him? How did it go?" Xie Lian explained his previous attempts. "The results are inconclusive. I've already done so much. If he isn't immortal, then there's only one other possibility. A supreme." Fu Yao sneered, "Who knows? Maybe he is a supreme." Xie Lian said softly, "Do you think ghost kings are so idle like us, that they'd come to a small village to collect junk with me?" We aren't idle. Okay, okay, okay. On top of the small hill outside the shrine, the three heavenly officials could hear the sound of that team, moving about easily without worry within the shrine, as if he wasn't the least bit worried over anything. Nan Feng said in a low voice, "No. We still have to think of a way to test if he's a supreme." Xie Lian rubbed his forehead. "Go ahead and try, but don't go overboard. What if he really does turn out to be a runaway young noble? I get along pretty well with this little friend, so be nicer. Don't bully him." "But don't bully him," made Nan Feng screw up his face, and Fu Yao's eyes rolled to the back of his head. Xie Lian nagged a bit more before reopening the door. San Lang was checking out the broken table leg, and Xie Lian cleared his throat to get his attention. "Are you all right?" "I'm all right," San Lang smiled. "Just checking to see if we can fix this table leg. Everything just now was all a misunderstanding, please don't mind them," Xie Lian said warmly. "Since you say so, I won't mind. Maybe they thought I looked familiar." Fu Yao said frostily, "Yeah. Quite familiar. Probably why I was mistaken." San Lang grinned. "What a coincidence. I think you two look rather familiar too." Although on high alert, Nan Feng and Fu Yao were no longer reacting violently. Nan Feng said gloomily, "Make some room, I'm going to conjure a distance shortening array." The distance shortening array was a spell that could compress thousands of miles into one step, infinitely. Convenient. However, each use would consume a significant amount of power. Xie Lian rolled up the straw bedding mat on the ground and said, "Why don't you draw it here?" With all the commotion earlier, Fu Yao didn't have the chance to look at the shrine properly. Now that he had spent some time in the dilapidated shack, he looked around, feeling incredibly uncomfortable. He wrinkled his brows. "You live in a place like this?" Xie Lian grabbed a stool for him to sit and replied, "I always live in places like these." Nan Feng paused briefly when he heard this, then went back to drawing the array. Fu Yao didn't sit down, but his expression also turned complicated. He mostly looked surprised, but there was a tiny part that looked smug. He quickly neutralized his expression. "Where's the bed?" "This is it," Xie Lian replied, hugging his straw mat. Nan Feng looked up to glance at the mat, then lowered his head again. Fu Yao side-eyed San Lang, who was standing aside. "You two are sleeping next to each other. Is there a problem?" Xie Lian asked pointedly. Finally, Nan Feng and Fu Yao couldn't come up with anything else to say, so no more problems. Xie Lian turned to San Lang to continue their earlier conversation. "Sorry we were interrupted before. San Lang, what's going on at Banyu? Do tell." San Lang had been staring at him earlier, looking to be deep in thought, his eyes dark, and had only just snapped out of it when he heard Xie Lian call to him. He gave Xie Lian a small smile. "All right." San Lang sorted his thoughts, then spoke. "That ghost of Banyu was the Guoshi of the ancient kingdom of Banyu, one of the dual wicked masters." "Dual means there's two of them. Who's the other one?" Xie Lian asked. San Lang, having all the answers, replied, "Another wicked cultivator from the Midlands named Fangxin." Xie Lian widened his eyes, but didn't say anything, and continued to listen. Turns out, the people of Banyu were a brutish warrior race who frequently enjoyed invading nearby lands. they seized an important checkpoint between the Midlands and the West region, and the two countries constantly fought over the border. Battles, skirmishes, the conflicts were never-ending. There, Guoxi was learned in the demonic arts, and the soldiers of Banyu trusted in it with all their hearts, willing to follow after the Guoxi until the ends of the earth. However, 200 years ago, a dynasty from the Midlands finally dispatched an army to invade and leveled the kingdom of Banyu. Although the kingdom of Banyu was annihilated, the resentment of the Guoxi and the soldiers would not disperse, and they remained behind to haunt the place. The kingdom of Banyu was built upon an oasis. But after its fall, it was as if the aura of evil permeated and rotted through the greenery. Soon, it was swallowed by the Gobi Desert. Some say they still saw shadows of Banyu warriors, giant and terrifying, with maces in hand, patrolling what once were the gates of Banyu. Thousands of civilians who used to live there gradually migrated, unable to make a living in a dying oasis. This was when the rumors of disappearing travelers started to spread. All those who had come from the Midlands wishing to pass through must leave behind half their assets as toll, human lives. Fu Yao smiled without mirth. This young master sure knows a lot. San Lang smiled back. It's nothing. You just don't know very much, that's all. Xie Lian snorted in spite of himself, amused by San Lang's sharp tongue. San Lang continued lazily, this is just based on unofficial history and ancient records of strange supernatural occurrences. Who knows if the Guoxi of Banyu is real? Maybe the kingdom of Banyu doesn't even exist.